All right. Hello there. So my name is Jonathan Mahan. This is the Courageous Conversations podcast. Today I have David Fite with me. He is a staunch libertarian. I
Hello.
am a leftist progressive. We're going to be having a difficult conversation about government regulations and kind of by extension, government in general, right? This is an area we very much see things differently. To be totally transparent, this is an area I've never really talked to libertarians about their views before. I can't understand libertarians and I think they're morons. Like literally that is where I'm coming to this conversation from. I think they're naive morons. So the purpose of this conversation is not for either one of us to change the other's mind, right? He's going to leave this conversation still believing what he believes. I'm going to leave it still believing what I believe. We're not trying to change each other's minds. We're trying to get to a point where we fully understand each other better. I want to fully understand what libertarians, or at least what David Fite believes, right? And I want to get to the point where I can say, okay, I still think he's wrong, but I know where he's coming from. And you know what? If I believe the premises he believes, I'd probably agree. And you know, if I had the same priorities and values he had, I'd probably lean that way too, right? I'm hoping, to give him the same thing as well, right? Where he can understand where I'm coming from. But again, this is very different from what we see happening mostly online, which is, A, just rude and disrespectful, but B, it's all about changing people's minds. We're just trying to show up and let curiosity and empathy lead the conversation and get to the point where we fully understand each other. Now, maybe one day we'll come back and we will debate each other, but that'll be a different thing altogether, right? You can't get to the point of debating and disagreeing until you first cleared that hurdle of understanding each other. And that's what we're going to be modeling today in this conversation. So thanks for joining me for this, David.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So the first question to kick things off before we get specifically to regulations is just on a high level. How do you see government? Would you describe it as inherently evil but necessary? Is it evil and unnecessary? Is it good but corruptible? I'll let you open up with how you see things.
I think it's somewhere between a necessary evil and an easily corruptible good. I think that there's the old saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that you can see that through some politicians that have, started off really strong with an anti-establishment, pro-people message and eventually get corrupted through their days in government. So I think that the founding fathers kind of had the right general idea that it was a necessary evil that needs to be kept in check as much as possible. But without it, anarchy is not necessarily much better. We still need something to make sure that people aren't killing each other, but as little of that thing as possible.
Yeah. So you probably think, if you're subscribing to the necessary evil, that makes sense that smaller is better, right? If it's an evil, it's necessary, you do want to trim it down to make it as small as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're not as far off as I thought on that, because you did kind of open the door to, maybe some elements of a necessary good. Personally, I very much see it as a good thing. Like the things that need to happen for society to function well, I don't think can happen with just individuals entirely acting freely and unrestrictedly, because human beings have bias and the ability to have warped views and low empathy and low understanding of how our activities impact others. Sometimes we know how it's impacting others, we just don't care. But more often than not, we don't really realize how things are impacting others, or we kind of deprioritize those things and don't realize the significance of them, right? So I think when you have a high population, right, and a dense population, things might be different. If we go back 300 years and it's just 6 pioneers out on the plains together, they can probably do whatever they want and not impact each other. But in this globally connected world where there's lots of people and everything internet connects with everything and every string you pull affects 5 other things, people can't possibly be trusted to do the right things all the time because they just don't understand the impacts of their actions. So I believe the role government fills of someone, a big brother imposing rules on people and saying, no, you can do this, you can't do this, this is okay, this is not okay, you over there, stop that. Like, I think that role is absolutely good. It is a necessary good, and it helps society be infinitely better. Mm-hmm. Now, I do think it's easily corruptible, though, right? Depending on how you have the government structured, depends on how easily corruptible it is, right? I would say the kind of, checks and balances system the US has and a democratic process is probably in the middle of the ground as far as corruptibility, right? There's definitely a better way to do it that I don't think the world has really seen yet. And there's definitely many worse ways to do it where even more corruption exists that the world has seen plenty of. But personally, I think what it does is good. And again, it's just easily corruptible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also want to clarify that I see like the federal government as inherently evil because of how big it is and how easy to corrupt it is. Where like local government or even state government, I think I see it as much more of a necessary evil or even a corruptible good, because like you said, when you have a dense population like we have in some areas, the rules kind of need to change. But part of the country is still the way it was 300 years ago with like 12 people out in the middle of nowhere. You drive like an hour west of where you are and there's nothing. We were out about an
Yeah.
hour south of Grand Junction for the last 2 months. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the prairie times. So, localized government, I think, is the most important step towards, making sure that we're not, New York City doesn't need to control Western Colorado in any way, and keeping them separate, and the federal government just doing as little as it needs to do, like border protection and military, and establishing a power in those local governments, giving them some backup if something goes down, I think is what the federal government's job is.
It's interesting. One thing I've noticed in my own life is that for my whole life, I have believed in the importance of state government and a preference for leaving things in the state's hand, only move them up to the federal level if necessary. And I still believe that. However, I have noticed on a lot of issues, I find myself backing a federal mandate, right? Whenever it's something that I agree with, for example, gay marriage. I have no problem with the federal government saying, screw you, Alabama. Gay people can get married. I don't care what you say. This is America. This is how we roll. All states have to comply. Like that doesn't bother me because that's so obviously right. And it would upset me so much if states went against it. So I actually don't know where I actually stand on that. And I think this happens a lot in politics where people have one kind of professed belief, but then when the rubber hits the road and whatever, the shit hits the fan, they suddenly change their views. And I've done that before where I've said, oh yeah, states over federal, definitely. But a lot of issues have come up where I've been like, oh, F those states, federal government, step in and do something. So yeah. I actually don't know where I truly sit on that. I know where I think I sit on that. But again, I've had some cognitive dissonance in a few situations where I've gone, maybe I'm not as pro-state government as I thought I was,
Yeah. Well, I think with especially the example of gay marriage, it's a little bit less of the federal government coming in and telling the states what to do, and more of the federal government telling the state government what they can't do. So it's the people of those states having the backup of a federal government that's protected by a constitution and doing their job, that's making the state governments not do something that they shouldn't be doing, like restricting marriage on basis of sexual preference, compared to, like, say, a minimum wage law where it's saying you have to change how you do it for this kind of subjective monetary system, so because like I completely agree with the federal mandate for gay marriage. I think that that's something that the states shouldn't have the right to do wrong. The governments can't tell people who can and can't get married, so the federal government backing us up on that, I'm 100% in favor of too.
One other question, just kind of about government in general before we dive specifically into regulations. What is your ideal government look like, right? If you got to write a novel and control everything about how government should function, what it should be like, your utopia, right? What would you say your utopia looks like? What kind of role should government function? How should it work?
Man, that is definitely that's an interesting question, because I'm definitely someone that tries not to do that in my head too much. And I'm somebody that even when I run for office, I'm a representative of constituents, and it's all about like kind of mutually beneficial solutions. And so my perfect world would probably be something actually different than what I believe, because I understand that other people believe other things.
Right.
So I think the perfect government would look something fairly similar to what we have, with term limits and probably a larger House of Representatives. So there's a little bit smaller. And I also would go back to the state legislatures electing the senators, because I think that that was a good dichotomy of two different houses of Congress that were kind of had different sets of interests, and one was controlled by the people and one was controlled by the state governments. And I think that was a better system than how we have it now. And definitely, like I said, term limits. I think that there would be a social safety net, but not such a terrible one like we have right now that makes you jump through crazy hoops. I'm a big fan of something more like UBI, where we're not penalizing people for being successful or trying to better their lives, and we're also not rewarding people for giving up on their lives or just not doing anything. Healthcare is a gray area for me. I honestly don't really know what my perfect healthcare system is. It would probably look something like Tulsi Gabbard's single payer plus system, where we're leaving the private industry alone, but also like having something government controlled that's done well so that people don't die. I think that as the greatest country in the world, which we used to be, and we're not right now, but we could be again, we have the ability to make sure that people aren't dying. Like, I think that that's something that the left talks about that I 100% agree with. Obviously my pure libertarian morals would want it to be more charity than government that's keeping people alive and keeping people healthy and housed and fed and everything. But somehow it has to happen. Like, there's no way that we don't have enough money in this country to have it happen. So I think that if we, aren't wasting our tax dollars on wars and dumb shit and pay raises for politicians, that we can spend it on some basic necessities for people, and then still be able to lower taxes, allow charity to thrive at the same time.
I think for me, right, I don't have this utopia perfectly painted out on the smaller issues, but in general, I'm fine with the big government. In general, I'm fine with social programs. In general, I'm fine with the people who have won the game of our society paying to fund keeping our society running, which part of that includes taking care of the people who have lost, right? We've seen many times in history where when you have these societies that don't take care of the people who have lost, those people get fed up and a lot of violence happens and instability happens. So part of the price you pay to keep this machine going so you can keep having winners making millions is you've got to pay to take care of and make sure people don't die at the bottom, right? Whether through forces outside their control or within their control, people don't like dying and people don't like watching their daughter starve to death, right? And they're willing to do desperate things to avoid it. So I'm totally fine with having the winners of the game pay to keep the game running. That's fine, right? I'm fine with big government. My kind of utopia, though, is finding some way to structure government positions so that they are unappealing. So the only people who would self-select to go run for government are the altruistic type people. Make that job fucking suck. Make it have, right? We see this in the nonprofit world, and a lot of times with teachers, who gets attracted to the nonprofit world? People who are interested in the greater good over their own personal gain. Those people are there because they don't get paid crap and they work a whole ton and nobody thanks them, right? So make government jobs suck, or representative jobs, make them suck. They don't pay all that well. They don't have great benefits, great retirement. Definitely into term limits, because you're right, government corrupts people. But if people are only in there for 4 years, they could probably keep their head above water for 4 years. And again, make the job suck so that only, and there could be other ways to do it too, but one way or another, craft the role of representative is such a way that only altruistic, empathetic people would want to work in that position. And then the jackasses will self-select themselves out of there, right? And again, even if one gets in, they're only there for 4 years before they're out. So only limited impact they can do. I think that would do a ton, because all the evils of our government we see come from the fact that we have corrupt motherfuckers in there doing it, right? And again, you can't always weed them out because you can't tell who's who. And to your point, sometimes good people turn corrupt, right? So term limits and make the job suck so only altruistic people want to be there. That would be a utopia.
Yeah, it's very difficult to tell who's good and who's bad. Like, I've flip-flopped opinions on people so many times. I mean, Rand Paul's a good example. When I got into politics, he was my hero. After Trump got elected, I was like, what are you talking about? I thought you were libertarian. Then he spent this year writing a whole bunch of really awesome bills that were hit some really important topics that no one was talking about. And I was like, okay, awesome. You're great again. And then he was like, Donald Trump is a libertarian and he's ending the wars. And I was like, oh my God, shut up. And it's a rough game, and it's impossible to actually tell the truth about these people because most of them are professional liars. Even for good, even if you're a professional liar for good, you're still a really good liar as a politician.
Yeah. No, I can see that. All right, moving on to our topic of regulations. I think the first thing we have to figure out about each other before we can go any further is like what areas of society and what areas of our lives do you think government has a right to even regulate? And I'm not necessarily looking for examples here, maybe if they help. I'm mostly looking for like how do you make that call when it's in the gray area? What's that like rule of thumb, that rubric you use to say this government should regulate, this government should stay away from? I'll let you kind of go for that one first.
Well, I think the libertarian answer on this one would be to bring up the non-aggression principle, which is just kind of a foundational belief for anyone in the LP. So as long as someone is not breaking the non-aggression principle, then the government should not step in. So if you are hurting someone else or stealing their stuff, then that's when the government can come in and tell you to stop. As long as it's consensual, there's no damage, there's no harm. That's why we talk about victimless crime so much. Regulation of drug use. If all you're doing it is to yourself, then that's not the government's job. But if you're hurting somebody else somehow, then we can talk about
how direct does the consequence have to be, right? On the drug side, you could say you're hurting your children, right, who have a parent who's addicted to drugs. On the business side, you could say, okay, well, our entire fucking state of California burned up in a large part to global warming, and here are the companies who mostly contributed to global warming, so you effers are on the line for what just happened, and we need to regulate you to stop you, right? Where do you draw the line as to how direct does the consequence have to be?
I would say with the drug one specifically, I think the line is a little bit further away because the damage is not it's not always there, I should say. It is kind of subjective. It's about how the kid handles it and how parents can be good parents and drug users at the same time. Just the fact that you smoke weed does not just all of a sudden make you a bad parent. So I think that's kind of a muddied gray area where you can't like really prove that this substance hurt this child somehow, so therefore we have to make it illegal. Where with global warming, I think there's a hell of a lot more science to be like, okay, you did this and it made us die, so now you pay us money because science. It's I think if you can like really prove it objectively is kind of how I would draw that line.
Yeah, it does get difficult to draw that line, right? The whole butterfly effect. I mean, you could make an argument that anything impacts anything else eventually, right? Somehow. So that is difficult. But so in general, though, you seem to be okay with the idea of indirect consequences being something that the government could get involved in, right? So if shore fishermen in Guinea can't make a living anymore because corporations have overfished the oceans, governments have the right to step in and say, stop overfishing the oceans. You're negatively affecting these shore fishermen in Guinea. Truth, I don't even know if Guinea has a coastline. That's how bad at geography I am. I know Papua New Guinea has a coastline, but anyways.
Yeah, I definitely think that, especially in that scenario where, they're just saying, okay, stop fishing. Definitely, if we can prove that something that they're doing is causing negative effects on the environment, to tell them to stop, I think is 100% within the government's right. As far as like maybe imposing like fines or something like that, I think that area might be a little bit more muddied as far as, were they doing it on purpose? Like if they were just like dumping waste into the river, then that's different than, something that we thought was good. And then all of a sudden science says, oh, this has been bad for the last couple of decades. That's not necessarily their fault. I think one of the biggest parts of the non-aggression principle is that it's intentional. It's aggressive. You're trying to hurt other people or actively not caring about hurting other people rather than, just doing something that might accidentally affect someone else. Kind of like the difference between murder and manslaughter.
Interesting. I'll run a scenario by you because I'm finding we don't disagree as much as I thought. Although again, maybe it's just not clear yet. Something I learned about in college was that the phosphates they used to put in laundry detergent would, of course, run off into waters and knock out like all the algae, which is the base of that ecosystem. And once you knock out the algae, all the other species that depend on it start disappearing. And they went, oh, shoot, we can't have our lakes, streams, and rivers annihilated. You need to stop putting phosphates in laundry detergent. Stat, right? Is that something that you think the government had a right to step in on, or is that something you think there was a different way it should have been handled other than a regulation banning those things?
So the one thing that I will say towards the less regulation side is that I definitely think that there's a way for the free market to fix issues like that when it is so just blatant and objective. Science says these phosphates are killing our algae. Then Tide says, hey, we stopped putting phosphates in our detergent, so we stopped killing algae. And then the other companies follow suit, and people are going to buy from the companies that don't have the phosphates in it, so they're not killing the world by using that laundry detergent. There are obviously reasons that people might not choose that detergent, and so I don't think that the free market could ever 100% solve those kinds of problems. But I think that there's a scenario where, just allowing people to self-regulate, for at least give them a chance after we figure out the science to do it themselves. And if the free market can correct enough to where only a little bit of these phosphates are going in because only 1 out of every 2,000 people are still buying this shitty detergent, and we've kind of solved the problem, then we don't need government. But if they don't self-regulate and they're still doing it, then okay, government come in and stop them. Maybe give them a couple of months to figure their shit out, figure out how to do it without the phosphates, so you're not hurting their business by just slapping these kinds of restrictions on them.
That's interesting. That is a good segue into the next kind of topic. But first, before we move on, so it seems like we have pretty good agreement on the concept that if what you're doing is negatively affecting others, then it's reasonable for the government to step in. There's various degree, obviously, that still may lead to some disagreements between us on specific issues. But in general, we agree if what you're doing is hurting other people negatively, it's okay for the government to step in. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think maybe the crux of our disagreement we'll move on into is this question of, does self-regulation work, right? Can you trust people to do the right thing when presented with the right evidence? I am going to put my stake in the sand here and clearly say, fuck to the no. You cannot trust people to do the right thing for the world when presented with the right evidence, because either they'll deny the evidence is real, they just won't educate themselves and never even hear about it. They will rationalize it away to think it's not a problem. They'll blatantly say, yeah, well, I'm not a fisherman, so F those fish in that lake because it doesn't bother me. That is my stance. You cannot trust people to self-regulate. You can't trust business to self-regulate, not in the least. We'll dive into that in a bit more, but I'll kind of let you give a high-level overview of how you see the issue of the question of self-regulation and does self-regulation work?
So I will start off by saying that self-regulation only works in an actual free market, which America does not have currently. For self-regulation to work, you need to not have government propped up monopolies all over the place. You need to get rid of corporate welfare. You need to get rid of a whole bunch of BS within the federal government before self-regulation it would actually be successful on the level that we're that I think we're talking about here. After we allow the free market to actually be free and have people be able to enter it without gigantic regulations and taxes and different things hoops that they have to jump through that big corporations like Amazon and Walmart don't even have to look at because they surpass some random threshold, so they don't have to do all of these things. If we can let small businesses become a thing again, then yes, I do believe that people would choose the better companies to shop at. Actually talked about this the other day on my show. gentleman came on that almost always goes to Wendy's if he's going out for fast food, because both of his daughters are adopted, and Wendy's gives a lot of money to adoption agencies, and so they will drive past a McDonald's and a Burger King to get to Wendy's because they do good things. And similarly, my sister always goes to McDonald's because she had to stay at a Ronald McDonald House while my niece was in the hospital, and now like will go out of her way to go to McDonald's and always rounds up and does business with these people because they do good things. I don't shop at Amazon. I have only ever purchased 2 things from Amazon, and that was because I had a gift card. Other than that, I have never given Amazon.com or Amazon Web Services a cent of my money, because they're an awful company that do awful things to great people. And, Jeff Bezos is Lex Luthor. So, I do think that if people, aren't being crippled by both government and just societal financial problems, and like having to go out and find just the cheapest thing, the quickest, because their lives are a mess like they are right now, people would have a little bit more of an ability to choose the better restaurants, the better stores, the better handymans that are just doing a better job.
One of the things that's difficult in these conversations is to not make it drift into debate zone. We're all so conditioned to just debate, try to convince each other. I am going to float a few like counterpoints your way just to see what you do with them and see how you respond to them and see what your take on it is.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make this sound like a debate, but this is the only way I can think of to kind of get a window into that area of your mind. So most people know Walmart's a piece of crap company who does terrible things to the world. However, right, when you're poor and you can choose between $1 spaghetti sauce or going over to Safeway and buying $2 spaghetti sauce, you don't have a choice, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just now getting to the point in my life, probably in the next year or so, where I'll have enough income that I can start making those choices. But the vast majority of Americans are in a position where they really can't choose to increase their grocery bill from $600 a month to $800 a month just for a social cause, which means Walmart can get away with anything. Amazon too, right? Most people know Amazon's a piece of crap company, and yet Amazon has had massive record, profits this year because people are kind of backed into a corner, and it's like, well, I'm stuck at home. I need cheap goods because I'm laid off from work. I don't want to risk coronavirus to buy this, so I'm just going to go ahead and get it from Amazon. So I would say that people don't have the option to make those choices the way you're saying that they do in most cases. So again, trying to not make an argument here, but has that crossed your mind, and how do you answer that question when you think about stuff like that?
Oh, for sure. That's why I definitely wanted to make that caveat of like, we need to stop crippling these people before they can actually have this freedom of choice. The financial and economic society that we live in does not give us this freedom of choice for most people. You're completely right. I still shop at Walmart. I'm a lot less decided on Walmart than I am Amazon. But I think another thing is a lot of people just don't care. Is probably the biggest argument that I've had against myself in this mentality, is like a lot of people know Amazon sucks and still have Amazon Prime, which, you could still watch plenty of good things without giving them that money. Netflix exists. They're a decent company, treat their employees well. Hulu's a decent company. Disney's awful, but like you could easily live your life without signing up for Amazon Prime and watching those shows, but so many people do because they just don't care. And I think a lot of it is just going to be a cultural shift that we need to have to tell people, you need to vote with your dollars. You need to not give terrible people your money, and then terrible people would stop becoming millionaires.
So to me, that argument you brought up is kind of like the nail in the coffin of, oh, never mind, I guess that won't work. Let's look for something else. But for you, it sounds like you've thought that. It certainly creates some cognitive dissonance, but it isn't quite the death sentence to that mentality for you that it is for me.
Yeah, I just believe that social change, it could happen. Fair, like I don't want to say easily, but within a realistic amount of time. Within our parents' lifetime, where people, actually, again, have this a little bit more financial freedom and just care a little bit more about the people around them and what they're doing with their dollars. I think that it's nail in the coffin death sentence at the moment that self-regulation won't work the way America is structured right now, but I think we could get there with the right policies over the next decade or so.
If it's a question that can be answered, at least some version of an answer in a short amount of time, what changes do you think would have to happen in America before that would work?
I think first and foremost, we would need to overhaul the again, I don't have a strong plan for this, but I think we need to overhaul the healthcare system in America to make sure that people are actually like living healthy, good lives. And that's, pre-care as well as, actual healthcare. We need to fix the tax system so that people aren't getting a third of their paychecks taken out, and then just relying on some big check once a year that they think is income when it's just their money back. And I think that we need to shift a lot of the media focus away from bullshit that doesn't matter to things that we can actually actively change. If you watch the news, it's full of things that you have no power. It's either somebody got shot or some big mega dude is doing something terrible, or they're doing something bad in Washington. You don't have any way to fix that. If the media was, hey, here's a bad thing that's happening, and all you have to do is stop shopping there, and they could go under, and that guy will go bankrupt. And we have this social safety net for their employees, so we're not fucking all of them over. They're still cashing their UBI checks and can go get another job because the economy is good. And all we're doing is killing Walmart because why haven't we killed Walmart yet?
Okay. We see a little bit of that. We'll move on to a very closely related topic, just cover it from a different angle, is can we trust corporations to not fuck over the rest of the planet in pursuit of their own profits?
I think that one's definitely a lot harder to argue, personally. I think that it has to come from kind of that self-regulation mindset of, people aren't going to shop here if we do bad things, so we can't do bad things is the only way for it to work. You have to make it worse for business for them to do those bad things than to do it correctly. Because I think you're 100% right. Most companies care more about the bottom line than literally anything else, including their own health and their employees' health and like everything else in the world. They care about making money. So it would have to be a scenario where they wouldn't make as much money if they did bad things. And so I think, holding these companies accountable for their actions and making it widely known that they're doing terrible things is something I definitely see within the government's job description as well as media.
And, we certainly have seen some of that, right? You have Crayola saying, hey, we sourced the packaging for these crayons on sustainable forests, right? Like stuff like that, right? We, when the Black Lives Matter protests this happened this summer, we had all sorts of companies making statements about how racism is wrong, and some of them actually legitimately making changes in their business to make it more, equitable and a safer place for their, employees of color. So like some of that exists, right? I would agree, but I'm personally, I can think of a million more examples where it hasn't worked because a lot of stuff is hidden from the public, right? This only matters if it's stuff the public can see. People can't always see the sweatshops that source Nike sneakers. And of course, people also need to care. Like you mentioned, a lot of people just don't care. How many people know Nike uses sweatshops for their shoes? Hasn't really hurt that brand very much. Now, there has been a proliferation of competitors that pop up that advertise the fact that they don't do that. And that probably has had some effect on Nike, but it hasn't really changed the fact that they're still at the top of the game despite doing those things, right? And they probably look at their balance sheet and say, okay, since the controversy happened, we had a little bit dip in new customers, but if we were to fix our supply chain, holy shit, that made things more expensive. Forget it. It's worth it just to keep, the negative public image, because fixing the problem is so much more expensive. To me, again, that's one of those nail in the coffin things of that can never be an answer. I've seen so much proof that it doesn't work that I don't believe that can be an answer anymore. Do you still have hope that type of like, if we do bad things, we'll make less money type of regulation could work if maybe things were a little different than they are today?
I think that you make a very, very strong point when you say that like a lot of it's hidden and that people don't really know about it. And so, like I said, I think that's something that the government should be making sure of. I think that, making sure that people are telling the truth about what they're selling and how they're selling it, and, making sure that people are being honest and good in business is something that the government can definitely do that isn't even really regulation. It's just making sure you're being honest.
Sure.
And then obviously it's also the media's job to then get that information to people so that a lot of these problems aren't hidden. On top of that, I think that there are a lot of regulations that currently exist in business that are keeping companies like Walmart and Nike where they are. That if we kind of got government out of it, those companies would go under. Amazon gets huge amounts of corporate welfare every year. So does Walmart. So does Nike. Most of the companies that you would put on your shit list that could just go under tomorrow and you wouldn't lose a second of sleep, most of them are getting part of your tax dollars. So if we stop propping up these awful companies and stopped holding down the smaller companies that aren't able to make it up there with this good business, I think that would make it a lot more possible of a solution, so that people can actually make those choices.
That's kind of what you just described is maybe a result or a feature of government regulation and big government in general, or is that only specifically exist because of corruption in government? Could we have a non-corrupt government and not have that negative outcome, or would that negative outcome always exist regardless of who was in the seats?
I think a little bit of both, just depending on which specific laws and stuff that you're talking about, because we definitely have just generic regulations or tax laws that hurt small businesses just in general because of how they're structured. There are just laws that benefit big business, but then there's also individual lobbying and buying of politicians that helps individual companies with different corruption. You can look at the colleges, healthcare, and air travel are probably the best examples of those, where just nitpicky feuds between businesses and corporations within that industry has, they've bought out their senators and their congressmen on each side, and you watch those battles take place in Congress between two businesses. So, I think it's a little bit of both. So if we can get that corruption in the lobbying and get money out of politics, that would definitely solve some of the problem. But there's also definitely some overarching, just big government things that I think we would need to get rid of as well.
So it's almost like, from your perspective, in addition to government regulations serving to make bad people stop doing bad things like I presented, there's also an element where no matter what regulation you draw up, you will be choosing winners through how that regulation was written. And that's not right, to be choosing winners, whether you're choosing, company A over company B, or, company size A versus company size B.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah. I think that the government has definitely played a part in choosing the winners and losers in business quite a lot. And that is what I meant in the beginning by, we don't have a free market, because a free market doesn't prop up winners. It lets them die so that better business can take place.
Oh, that's interesting. Cool. All right, we'll move on from the self-regulation thing. Seems to me, you've opened my eyes to a little bit right in that last bit there about, government regulations having the impact of choosing winners. I think the question for us to think about is that just because of corruption, or would that happen even in a just government? Would that be a natural side effect of regulations that winners get chosen? I'm happy to see it either way. I don't have an opinion on that one. We both agree corruption is pretty freaking awful. We both agree that it's dangerous to trust people to care, because people don't always care. We both agree that in a really rough economy, people don't always have the choice. Even if they care, they don't have the freedom to choose. So there's, at least even in your worldview, there's a lot of serious issues with self-regulation. In my worldview, there's nails in the coffin. It's not an option. Those issues are so serious.
Yeah, I'm definitely. Yeah. That is a really solid summary so far. I think that there's often a misconception of libertarians that they're all anarchists, and so most of us are not. And there's definitely different degrees in which we want to dismantle the government, and an order at which we want to dismantle the government. So, social safety norms of regulation are pretty far down on the bottom of the list, after ending the wars and legalizing drugs, and balancing the budget and all sorts of other things that we would need to do to fix the country before we start getting into dismantling these nitty-gritty pieces of of government, like the small pieces of regulation we're talking about here. So I think that there's definitely a misconception that we all just want to like press a button and make the government blow up. And although that sounds fun, it's unrealistic. And I think we can agree on that for sure.
Yeah, I am surprised at how much, right, our views overlap. Like I said, when I talked about, these, in the beginning, these idiotic, naive libertarians, right, I was assuming you'd come at me and saying, of course, self-regulation works. Of course, people always do the right thing. Of course, corporations will do the right thing, right? Where you see some of the same problems I see, we probably just see it, again, a difference in degree as to how serious the problems are and whether or not they're insurmountable or if they're just, an obstacle to be dealt with. So yeah, there's more overlap than I thought there. All right, we don't have a ton of time here, but just on I guess the last thing we'll share a little bit on is, do government regulations work? Right? I mean, that's kind of the assumption so far in the conversation is that the burden of proof is on self-regulations to prove they work. But to be fair, we also have to prove that the government regulations work. So again, we don't have a ton of time here, but what are your thoughts on government regulations? Are they actually effective in accomplishing what they want to accomplish? Share some of your thoughts in that area.
I will again not be like a crazy libertarian and say that some government regulation has worked. There are definitely, things that like seatbelts in cars like that the government stepped in and now everybody does it. And it's just, it worked out for the best. Do I think that it could have been done without government? Sure. But, the government regulation does sometimes work. The problem, I believe, is when it is, just like term limits for the people, if these regulations are there and tweaked and last for a very long period of time, they also get corrupted. And so, you have lobbyists that try to build loopholes through them, and you have different forms of it being brought up so that it keeps small business down. And, we start fucking with it. And that's when it goes wrong. So I think, if government, like I said earlier, if government sees a problem, self-regulation isn't working, it steps in and solves that one problem, then it kind of lets that go. I think is the better form of government regulation. I like government in short, defined periods, because if left to grow, like I said at the very beginning, I think it corrupts itself pretty quickly.
Interesting. So, good example, that might be like our tax code, that maybe one day it was pretty fair, but like there's been so many loopholes and things that lobbyists have pushed for that now it's no longer good, and maybe it needs to be scrapped and started over again, type of a thing.
Yeah. I would be so okay with having like a 2-page tax code.
Yeah, for real. Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
pick a percent and just stick with it.
Right? You want to see tiers? Great. Build a little table with like 6 entries for tiers. Done. Yep. A page. Add a few asterisks. Great. A whole page. Like.
I'm literally in the middle of a course to become a licensed tax preparer, and it's like 4 textbooks this big, and I'm just like, why? And it's just for personal taxes.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I guess on the side of government regulations, they're definitely incredibly corruptible, right? The other thing that I wonder is, we see this, my profession as a salesperson, we see this all the time. When you write up a commission plan, you change the behavior of sales reps to just maximize their commission, which isn't always the best for the business, right? So similarly, when you rely on the free market to correct bad behavior, all you're doing is incentivizing hiding bad behavior. And I think by some degree, when you rely on the government to correct bad behavior, all you're incentivizing is just like either creating loopholes or just finding ways to keep doing bad stuff that technically keep you in line, where nothing's really gotten better, because again, there's just ways around stuff, right? You just say, oh, well, we're not allowed to do this bad thing anymore. Great, we'll replace it with this equally bad thing that is, safe for the regulations. And you play this eternal game of whack-a-mole where it's like, oh my God, every regulation we draw up, they find some way to do something equally bad to replace it, or they find a loophole to keep doing what they were doing, and it's technically still legal, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, that's one of the things I don't have a great answer for. It's like, oh yeah, shit, that is kind of the way it works. Again, going back to my utopia, if you had term limits and if you had, government positions that were only appealing to altruistic, empathetic people, I think that would be a significantly smaller issue. Right?
Oh, for sure. I think the other thing that your utopia would create is people that make the right kind of regulations, because at the moment the government is very, back to your example of whack-a-mole, you could just turn the game off. You could, there's a better solution that isn't just playing whack-a-mole forever if you want the gopher to not be up. And you need to attack like the root causes of problems, rather than just say, okay, this kind of sulfur can't be put in this kind of laundry detergent in this area. Why don't we just figure out the full science behind it and make and attack the actual root cause, instead of allowing them to jump to just a different kind of thing that's just as bad, but figure out what can be done that's good, and then say, hey, do this thing.
Do you think some entity other than the government could do that?
I definitely believe that. I think that there are good examples currently of non-government entities that provide good regulation. I like to use the example of kosher food. Governments never touch that, but yet hundreds of millions of people across the world trust a stamp on a box that it's not going to send them to hell. So I think that there's definitely incentive if a corporation is based around this kind of idea, like the kosher stamps, where their entire business model is based on being good and regulating and making sure that everything is clean and proper and perfect, and that is your entire business model, it's the only way you make money, then that incentive to do bad things almost just isn't there. If your entire income is doing good things, then they're able to say, hey, this person's good, this person's bad, and people are more inclined to shop where they say is good people.
Interesting. Do you think that would work? Because obviously people who choose to be kosher care about being kosher. Do you think that model would work in places where maybe people don't care so much? Like this is slavery-free coffee, right? Or these are cruelty-free animal products. Like when people don't care as much as a collective, do you think that would still work? Or is that limited to just those spaces where you have people caring?
I think it would work a lot less. Kosher is a great example because it works almost 100%. There aren't really many flaws with that. People not caring would be a good flaw, where people that are buying kosher food actually care. I think for a lot of it, it's people would care more if they felt like they weren't being preached to about it. And it was, I kind of go back to the societal change of, people are having these like, cruelty free or made in America kind of battles of things where, it's almost like you're trying to make someone feel bad for not buying your product. And there's kind of this societal thing that's like, oh, you have to shop at this place. And this cancel culture mentality has gotten, there's a huge anti-cancel culture mentality that I think is pushing back against self-regulation, because now people want to go to Chick-fil-A because they're homophobic, and I'm homophobic, so I want to shop at Chick-fil-A, and so it kind of creates this weird dynamic of, the bad people now going to bad places specifically because they're bad. And we would need less bad people in general for self-regulation to truly work, or at least more good people that care. And I think that we're definitely moving in a direction where, like you mentioned, we're seeing this pop up in business a lot more and more. We're seeing them participate in Black History Month and Pride Month, and just out here trying to do good things, donate a bunch. All of COVID, we saw most commercials where this is how we're making masks or ventilators or this or that. No one was actually advertising their products anymore. So I think that society is moving in a direction that could lead us to a good self-regulation where we don't need this government regulation as much. But it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take people like you and me talking about it in a real way and not preaching to each other and saying, you're terrible for shopping at Starbucks because they're leftist, communist bullshit,
So it's interesting, right? We could stay here for 3 more hours, I'm sure. We'll wrap it up now. But what's come up in this conversation is that in most areas we agree, just to different degrees, right? We both agree something's a problem, but we put a different amount of weight in it. We both agree something's potential, right? I think what you brought up about companies doing the right thing during COVID is nice. It's there, but it's small, and like you can't really put much stock in that, right? I think that people not always caring is a nail in the coffin of self-regulation, and that's the end of the argument. You still can continue with that argument, even admitting that problem. So it's interesting. We both see the same upsides. We both see the same downsides. Neither of us are really blind to much. We just put different weight and different stock in things. And obviously to sort that out, right, we'd have to go into massive amounts of research to figure out, whose approximate weight is correct. And we don't have time for that. But like, this was a conversation that I was a little bit nervous to have, right? Because again, I was like, man, I think these libertarians are naive MFers. Like, how am I going to talk to this guy and not be disrespectful? Because I think he's a moron. But it turns out we have the same values. Again, it's just differences of degree and how much weight we put in things, how much hope we put in things versus how, cynical we are in certain areas. And a lot of that stuff comes down to kind of subjective things, right? I doubt either one of us on any of these topics we disagreed on have spent 3 months of our lives doing exhaustive research in the area, right? You do the best you can, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it was funny. Just before I got on the call, I was talking to my dad just about what I was about to do, and I said that it was a conversation based on a polite conversation and not arguing, and so I was gonna have to bite my tongue a little bit, and then I said. I was like, he's kind of a left libertarian. He just doesn't want to call himself that because he thinks libertarians are dumb.
Right? We could very much be using different definitions of the word libertarian, right?
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting. One thing I should try to do, I think probably like a lot of people, I don't really feel confident in where I place myself in a political spectrum. I just believe in decency, human rights, and compassion. So that tends to put me on the left. But like, it would be interesting if I could find someone to interview with that was like way far left than me, that I was like, dude, are you an idiot? Like, that'd be interesting, right? To find that. Like, I don't usually delve deep enough into topics with people to know who that would be. I'm sure I know some people who are much further left than me, but generally, right, it's easy for me to spot disagreements with people on the right. But it would be interesting if I could find someone who's so far left that they even like made my stomach curl, right, and have a conversation with them. Because again, I really don't know where I am on that spectrum. Really have no idea. I just know people on the right piss me off more than people on the left do. So that's that place to be on the left, right?
Basically, yeah. I mean, I think it's important to talk about like the political quadrant. I don't know if you've seen the kind of grid map. So you have right, left economically, and then up, down between big government, small government. So for me, as long as you're on the bottom half of that towards the small government, you're on the same team as me. I don't give a shit where you fall, right, left. You can be all the way left and like one tick down from the middle into small government. You're still my friend. You're still an ally. That's liberty, unity for me. So
that's interesting. Cool. Well, thanks so much for having this conversation with me, my friend. It was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.